Hey guys, welcome to Population Review for Chapter 2 in AP Human Geography. I'm going to take some time here and review some of the key concepts that we learned in Chapter 2, try to give you some examples so that you can use this in preparation for your midterm exam. So the midterm exam study guide has 8 kind of key topics that we talked about from Chapter 2. So I'm going to go over some of them. Some of them you can refer to your textbook, but I'll focus on some things that I know that we needed to work on, like the demographic transition, what causes transition to those stages, population pyramids, and some of the problems related with population, because those are some areas that I think that we kind of struggled with. So where are the 4 main population clusters in the world, rank in order? We know that China is number 1, India is number 2, the United States is number 3, and Nigeria is number 4 as far as populated countries. When we look at which regions of the world are most populated, number 1 is East Asia, number 2 is South Asia, like India, and number 3 is actually Europe. And so when we look at those areas, so if you see a question, if it asks for country, you're thinking about China, India. If it asks for region, you're thinking like East Asia, South Asia, and then Europe. Okay, because those are the most populated places in the world. The difference between arithmetic, physiological, and agricultural density. Arithmetic density is easy. It's the number of people per space. Usually we go number of people per square mile. Physiological density is the amount of arable land per square mile. And then agricultural density is the number of farmers in a space. So those 3 things tell us different things. Arithmetic tells us simply how many people live there, so how dense is a place populated. Physiological can tell us how sustainable the place is. There's a really high physiological density and a really high population. You could tell us that, wow, it might be really effective at farming and producing agricultural things. And really low agricultural density, which means really number of low farmers per arable land, would mean that those farmers are also very efficient at producing what they want. So just some examples. Really high arithmetic density would be India. There's a lot of people per square mile. Really high physiological density, Egypt. There's a lot of people per arable land. And then agricultural density, really high agricultural density would be Netherlands. And then a really low agricultural density would be the United States. There's not a lot of farmers for the amount of arable land that we have in the United States. CBR, CDR, and RNI. Now we start to get into some of the concepts related to population statistics. So we know that CBR is crude birth rate, CDR is crude death rate. Those are just the number of births per 1,000 people or number of deaths per 1,000 people in a population. And the rate of natural increase is the difference of them. So rate of natural increase, that percentage tells us if a population is growing or declining. And this can help us determine what stage of the demographic transition model it's in, and sometimes even the level of development of the place. Now, we really haven't gotten into development a whole lot, but we do know that places typically in stage 2 or 3 of the demographic transition are we would consider them developing. So they're developing nations. Places in stage 4 and 5 of the demographic transition, we tend to call them HDC, or highly developed countries. Sometimes we call them MDCs, more developed countries. And we'll get into the difference between that in future. But typically our rate of natural increase most of the time is related to how developed a country is. So let's start to get into the demographic transition, because this is a place that I know we struggled with in class, just trying to understand different stages of the DTM and why we go through. So using the demographic transition model, we know we have, as time goes on, so on the bottom we have time, and over here we have population. And so here's high population, low population. So anyway, so we have these different stages, and we've got death rate, and so we've got death rate, and then we've got birth rate. And then we've got population. Okay. And then so we've got different stages. So we can identify them by here. We can identify them by here. And we identify them by here. Okay, so this is stage 1 of the DTM. Here's stage 2 of the DTM. Here's stage 3. Here's stage 4. And we can even say that we know there is, in fact, a stage 5. Population. And birth rate. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at what some of these things mean and such. So if we take a look at stage 1 of the demographic transition model, we know here that both birth rates and death rates are high. So what that means is that they're both fluctuating. In stage 1 of the DTM, countries are largely in hunting and gathering. They are agricultural societies, and there are all kinds of pandemics and flus and horrible things, natural disasters that kill off population. So there are some good years and there are some bad years, but ultimately population remains low and birth and death rates remain high. You have to have a lot of children if you want your children to actually live. Okay, but as we transition from stage 1 to stage 2, so there's the demographic transition, we start to see some changes. Now, the demographic transition, so stage 2 is a transitional stage. The transition occurs when there is an increase in a change in a couple of things. Number 1 is agricultural technology, which allows more food. So change in agriculture, so more food allows to feed more people. And the other thing are some increases in medicine. And not necessarily, like vaccines and antibiotics and stuff like that, but simply understanding that you shouldn't put your human waste in the middle of the street because it makes people sick. So there's some advancements in that sort of a thing. So what starts to happen as we get more food and we understand hygiene and safety, a little bit of medicine, and we start to move into industry. So this is the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, right? What we start to see is that the death rate begins to fall, okay? And when that happens, families would normally be having 5, 6, 7 babies, hoping that 2 or 3 of them lived. What started happening was that they were all starting to live, and so people kept having a lot of babies because that's what was culturally acceptable and normal for that generation. But the death rate fell, more of them lived, and what you get was this really big population explosion. So in stage 2 of the DTM, as many countries are moving into the early Industrial Revolution, people are starting to move to cities. They're starting to look for jobs in factories. There's better sanitation. There's more food. And people are living, and they're living a little bit longer, and so we get this population growth. Okay, then we transition from stage 2 to stage 3. Stage 3 is also a transitional stage, and this is the kind of the post-industrial. So these are countries that have already been in the Industrial Revolution for a while, and they're starting to really move into really big business, maybe some service sector and financial stuff like that. It's an evolving economy, and and this is where we have some really serious advances in healthcare. And what we also start to see in stage 3 of the DTM is we start to see women get involved in the workforce, and become educated. And that's a really key piece here, because what starts to happen is in stage 3 of the DTM, people realize that, oh man, my babies are living longer. I don't need to have 7 kids if I want them to have 2. I could just have 2 kids and they're probably going to live. In addition to that, women start, in some places, start to move into the workforce, or at least get more access to health care and contraceptive or prenatal care, so their babies are living, or they decide, I don't want to have as many kids, and the birth rate now starts to fall. Okay, and we still have some population growth in this stage 3. You see this gap here. There's still some population growth, but that population growth is starting to kind of even out. Okay, so it's transitional in that aspect. So there's still population growth, but not as fast as in stage 2. And then when we go into stage 4. So we transition into stage 4. And stage 4 was thought to be kind of the end of this for a while, where population remains steady. You see here that birth and death rates are about the same, but population remains high and steady and constant. These are your highly developed countries. These are your places like the United States and a lot of places in Europe where people are pretty much just having enough kids to replace themselves. There's a really great access to healthcare. There's a really highly developed economy. Again, post-industrial, and now population kind of remains the same. Then there's the stage 5, where countries transition, and we start to see that the death rate here starts to move beyond the birth rate. And then we start to see this kind of population dip. Okay, this happens when people are deciding not to have as many kids anymore. And we're starting to see in some places like this, particularly in Europe, where people are making conscious decisions that I don't want to have kids, or I only want to have one child, because they are very, very expensive. Living in an urban or a suburban area, kids are a liability, not an asset. And so as people started to move into cities, or in this case, in stage 4 and 5, we're talking about people living in suburban areas near cities, kids become expensive, and people don't want to necessarily own them, or not own them, have them, excuse me. So we start to see this death rate creep up. And what happens again overall is that the population starts to go down. Okay, so overall, this model explains to us, this whole thing explains to us why population grows. Okay, and what are the factors that are associated with it, and most of the times we associate it with development. And so there are still some countries that are here in stage 2. Many of them are located in Africa. And until all these countries, every country in the world, moves through every stage of the demographic transition, we are going to be living in this middle section here, right, of population growth. We're going to see the world's population continue to increase. Most experts think about until about 2050 or 2060, and then we're going to see it plateau in stage 4. And then people think that, demographers think that about 2100 or 2125, we're actually going to start to see the population of the Earth kind of decrease significantly as people decide not to have as many children, and we get into the stage 5 situation. Okay, so that's the demographic transition and some of the things related to population so far. I'm going to do another video specifically on age, sex structure, and population pyramids, because I know that's another topic that you guys probably want to consider.